Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is April 19th, 2019. We're here on a Friday evening with somber news, but with the desire to help. We are here tonight to bring back onto Mormon Stories Podcast Leah and Cody Young. Many of you who have been following Mormon Stories over the past year will remember this beautiful and powerful interview with Leah and Cody Young and their daughter Brinley, 15 years old, where they shared their faith crisis story. Actually, they shared their time in the church, their devotion to the church as very Orthodox members. And their upbringings and all of that led to them having four beautiful daughters, Cody going to medical school to become a pediatric radiologist, Leah ultimately becoming an entrepreneur as a mom as well. And it was just one of the most important interviews in the history of Mormon Stories Podcast for a number of reasons. What some of you may or may not know or have followed is that over the past, once Leah and Cody weren't able to find support from their stake president and bishop for their faith crisis, once they started to lose friends and community around them in the Columbus, Ohio area, they started a Facebook group, a support group posted on Mormon Spectrum in the Columbus, Ohio area to receive and give support to and from progressive and liberal and post-Mormons in the area who needed people to talk to. And then shortly after creating that group, they were summoned by their bishop and then stake president. There were a few meetings that happened where they were told to disband the group for under threat of excommunication, and they refused under as a matter of conscience to disband the group. Were summoned to a disciplinary council. They did their podcast with me again after the initial meeting, and ultimately last Sunday they were in their disciplinary council. We covered that on Mormon Stories podcast on the Facebook page, and they received the letter 2 days ago that they were excommunicated. So we are kind of sad and somberly announcing that their interviews with their stake president were recorded as a matter of self-protection more than anything, and the disciplinary council itself was recorded again as a matter of self-protection. And none of this would have been shared if the verdict was, exoneration. But because they were excommunicated in their minds and in many people's minds unfairly and unjustly, what we're going to be doing tonight is we're going to be talking to them about the story behind, the events leading up to the disciplinary council. Then we're going to be playing for you the audio recording of the disciplinary council, and then we're going to be bringing Cody and Leah back at the end to discuss their reactions to the disciplinary council. And then, next week on the Mormon Stories podcast feed, we'll be including the audio versions of their 2 meetings with their stake president with names redacted to protect the innocent. And so that's what you're in for. This will probably be, a 4-hour Mormon Stories podcast interview tonight. We hope you guys can stick with us. Please share it on your walls right now and let people know what we're doing. We want to have as big of a live audience as we can. We do live audiences for 2 reasons. Number one, it's a great way to get feedback, questions, etc. It's more interactive, and it's just another way to reach people. So please share and please spread the word in Facebook groups, on your walls, with email, on Instagram, however you can. Please share the public feed, and we'll make sure the world knows about what we feel is a real injustice. So without any further ado, Leah and Cody Young, first of all, my condolences, and then welcome back to Mormon Stories Podcast. It's great to have you, even under not so good circumstances.
Thank you.
Hi, John. It's good to be back.
Okay, so I think we should probably begin having you guys talk a little about your intentions. So there's a lot that's gone on between you, having your faith crisis, starting the support community, going on Mormon Stories Podcast, and then going through with your disciplinary council, recording everything, and now talking about it openly. What would each of you like to say to begin with, just to talk about your intentions?
Yeah, great question. So the reason that these conversations were recorded, as you mentioned, was first and foremost for ourselves, to protect ourselves. We did not feel like what we were being accused of and what was being asked of us was just. And we knew going into the meetings with the stake president that he was concerned about our support group and having formed and participated in the support group. So we had no idea where this was all heading. We weren't, planning or expecting it to end in disciplinary council. But nonetheless, we wanted to record it just to have that record as an unbiased record of what transpired. We wanted to protect ourselves. We wanted to protect the good name of our family and our reputation in our community, should it end up in a disciplinary council, which turned out to be the case. Our intention was never, and even as we sit here today and we'll publish these things, or our intention is not at all to harm the church. And I think that if anybody takes the time to listen to the entirety of this, they'll see that is not in our heart. We don't have any desire to hurt the church. We certainly have no desire to speak ill of or hurt any of the individuals who are involved in this process on our ward level or at the stake.
All right. Leah, what would you like to add?
Yeah, through this whole process, I've shared that I feel like we're all victims in a way. And I really did feel and have felt that these are good men. They really are good men. And sometimes for people who have been hurt by the church in different ways, it can feel like that's a difficult thing to hear maybe, but I really feel like these are good, kind, loving men. They really are. We've felt that love from them, and especially from our bishop, actually, who I think is doing the best he can in a system that has some unhealthy practices. And our desire is, we have painstakingly made each decision along the way. And we'll get into a little bit more of that later, but it truly isn't to hurt, it's to help. That's our desire, to help. And so when we've been accused of certain things or hear rumors at times that have gone around or been told, oh, this is a publicity stunt, I guess what I would say to that is that for anybody who's ever gone through this or anything like it, the number one way to be unfairly characterized and marginalized and somewhat hated is to speak out. And that's why, in our estimation, such a small percentage of the people who go through this say anything, because they know that they will probably not be listened to, but they will most likely lose friends and lose business potentially. And there's a lot to lose. And so for those who may be thinking that this comes from a place of popularity, I would like to reassure you that this is the number one thing that you can do to be judged and labeled and cast aside and mischaracterized. Our integrity guides us to do it anyway, but it is really hard, and it's been at times we've wanted to crawl back into a hole, and so but going back to our intention, it's to help, and so we dig ourselves out from the hole we would like to at times crawl into, because we do believe that our voice can help to make the church and the people who are learning more things about the church a healthier place for everybody.
I love it. We have a great live audience so far. We've got over 200 people joining us live. That's a very large audience. We've had 10 people, maybe 7 people share it so far. If we can get that share up to 30 or 40, I think the ripple effect could be really big. So please, everyone who's willing, please share this on your live feeds or wherever you can. We'd love to have as big of a live audience as we can. Okay, so folks are going to be able to go back and listen to the 2 stake president interviews and also the disciplinary council, but we'll be playing that tonight. But Cody and Leah, why don't you guys take us back to the beginnings of your interactions with your bishop and stake president, and talk us through everything that happened that led up to the disciplinary council, just so that we can hear your version of it, because I think that's important. And there are a few points that really need to be made prior to people hearing the disciplinary council so that they can watch for some of the problematic elements, I think.
Yeah, so we had met off and on with our bishop for the better part of a year. He happens to be a friend of ours before we, went down the faith journey, and still to this day remains a friend of ours and a good man that we respect and admire. And he was really great over all the meetings that we had. He sat with us, he empathized, he listened, he was not dismissive. We do hear stories of bishops and stake presidents who are less than loving, unfortunately, in these situations, but that was not our experience at all. And so when in the beginning of January, we heard that the stake president wanted to meet with us, that was a little more concerning, right? We had been working with the bishop, and he was aware of where we stood and our feelings for the church, and he was aware of the support community that we had formed and why we had formed it. But it didn't seem, at least from our perspective, it didn't seem to be too alarming to him. He seemed comfortable with where we were at. And I don't know who shared what or how the stake president was made aware, but obviously somehow he was made aware that we had started and were participating in the support group. And so he summoned us, or he asked us to come in and meet with him. And that first meeting was on January 6th of this year that we went in and we met with him for the first time. And this was the first time that either of us had any real contact with him. I don't think Leah had even spoken a word to him before that day. And I had met him in passing, several years prior, but we didn't have any communication with him at all prior to that.
Real quick, to what extent was your bishop able to successfully address your concerns? How prepared was he? How knowledgeable was he? And how effective was he in the many conversations you had with him?
I would say he was very effective, in his role as a minister, in terms of being loving and acknowledging our feelings as valid, not trying to persuade us otherwise, not coming to share scriptures or talks that would, lead us to feel like we're making, that we're being led astray. It was never any of that. But I mean, the unfortunate reality of this is that neither the bishop nor the stake president are in a position to answer questions on behalf of the church. If the organization is not willing to tell the full truth, to come clean on the complexities, the contradictions, the messiness of its own doctrines, of its own policies, of its own history, how can the boots on the ground, how can the local leaders resolve the concerns of the individuals, it's almost a no-win situation in terms of resolving those concerns. If the concerns are about those doctrinal and historical problems, the local leaders can offer ideas, they can offer suggestions, and they often do, and sometimes they're way misguided. But even if they're very, very well intended, they're not going to address the problem at large, which is the organization, the system, not being willing to own up to the challenges of its history and doctrine.
And even in those meetings, out of love and compassion and concern for them, we're not really in a position where we want to take them down the rabbit hole and dive deep into history. We don't feel like, we've never during this whole process felt like it's our position or our job to try and regurgitate months and months and now 2 years of deep study and books. And that's just not something we want to put our energy into. And certainly we don't want to hurt them in their faith because we know how painful it is. So we sort of skirt around the real issues because we don't want to hurt them.
Sure, that makes sense. Did you sense that he was knowledgeable or trained about these issues in a way that was helpful to you? Because that leads to why you would create a support group, right? Were there any resources from the bishop or the ward that were helpful in resolving your concerns?
I don't remember there being any. I can say that that in one of the meetings, I don't remember, in one of the meetings with the stake president, it might have been the second one, the bishop did share that he had at that point started sharing some of the gospel topics essays with, I think, some of the priests in the ward, and how he had decided it was important to begin to learn about these things. So I think through this whole process, clearly he was coming to understand, that these doctrines and these ideas that are found in the gospel topics essays, they're not widely distributed. They're not well known amongst the church membership and not in his ward. And so that was one way that he was trying to help prevent situations like this. So we applaud him for that. I think that's really wonderful. I venture to guess that is not the rule, but rather an exception.
And I sense that you're wanting to be charitable and not throw them under the bus. And I'm actually not trying to get you to do that. I'm just trying to make the point that, would you have, if your bishop had been able to resolve your concerns, would you have needed, and if the church had resources to support people in faith crisis, would you have needed to create the support group?
No. And we shared this with the stake president several times, that the church doesn't offer a space for those who have significant questions and doubts. And the stake president's response was, well, your bishop's office is really the place to share those. And again, I would counter that is absolutely across the worldwide church, that is not the place for those who have significant questions and doubts to have them resolved, to have them validated, to have their feelings, validated. Again, not that almost all the bishops are very good, but they're just not trained to be able to handle that situation.
Right.
And in the end, they can't empathize because they haven't been through it.
And it's really not their job. I really do actually have true empathy for them because, they're being faced with this more and more, and they didn't really sign up for this. This wasn't really in their job description, and they're giving of all of their time, without any additional pay. And so it's not that I don't think that's really that we're trying. It's just that we do feel a lot of empathy for them, because if we put ourselves in that same position, right? And I think Cody was absolutely on the trajectory to be on the other side of that desk. And had we not learned what we learned through our journey of trying to help and support our friends, we would also find ourselves in a very uncomfortable and difficult position. And we could just as easily feel like we're grasping at straws and not understanding what was happening.
Sure. Okay. So you got to the point where your stake president calls you in. What do you want to share about what happened in that first meeting?
Well, that was before the podcast. And we talked a lot, and he listened. He did a great job at listening, honestly. In both meetings they did. And, we shared with him our experience. We shared why we felt like it was important. We shared that we felt like we were trying the best we knew how to live the principles that we were taught in the church, which is to mourn with those that mourn. We shared how we covenanted to do that, and how when we discovered that there was a huge segment of the Mormon population who were really mourning and grieving not only the loss of the deeply held faith that they loved, but also when they become vulnerable about that, they often do lose their community because people have been taught to fear them. And so it's a death that's difficult to describe. I don't want to compare it to someone dying, but I don't know how else to, I said on the podcast, I don't know if for 6 months, it was just like the world was spinning for us. And so we knew that those people were out there just based on statistics alone. And we had gone to the Houston retreat, and we shared this with him in the meeting, and we felt so just to be seen as not deceived, and to know that we weren't alone, and to be with 50 other people who were going through this. It was so meaningful to us, and it was so nourishing to us, and it was so helpful for us. And so that's when we decided that if we could create a space that was helpful and nourishing and uplifting and helped create community that many people felt like they had lost, that was something that we should do, that is something that Jesus would do.
And what was his, what are your memories, and, or, people are going to listen to it later, but what do you want to say about his demeanor, his, his reasons for the meeting, his reactions to what you said? What were his concerns in that first meeting? What do you guys want to say about that?
My recollections, and actually haven't listened to the recording of the meeting, but my recollection was that it seemed to me that he was in a mode of just trying to understand, like trying to get a feeling for where we're at, what's our testimony like, and what are we feeling, and he was clearly already concerned. He did express, I believe, some concerns throughout the meeting about our reasoning, or about the way we were attempting to resolve our concerns. Like, were we giving the faithful side of the answers enough effort and enough time? So he had those concerns, but it was, as Leah said, and I think the record will show that he really did a lot of listening, and we did most of the talking, is my recollection.
He was concerned that we maybe had started a different church. And we said, no, this isn't a different church. He was concerned about what we were sharing. I know this because I've listened to it several times to make sure that we keep everyone's privacy safe. So I've listened to this several times over the last day. But he was concerned about what we shared and how we shared it and what we were saying about the church. And we reassured him that this was not a group where we bashed the church. This was a group for support and fellowship. This was a friendship group. I believe in that first meeting, there may have been talk about, disbanding the group. I don't know if that word was used, so. Not in the first talk.
I don't think so.
Maybe that wasn't until the second meeting. It was really a discovery conversation. But because I knew of the growing concern about this group, because our bishop had shared with us that the word had gotten out, and it was hard for us to hear, because we've tried so hard to be very intentional about the way we've walked through this, which is why we went to the weekend in Houston, to find out how to communicate with believing family and friends in a way that felt safe to them. So we left our kids and we flew to Texas so that we could navigate this in the way that felt the most safe and healthy for all involved. And we'd really tried to do that in our ward here. And so our bishop shared with us that the word has gotten out that you started a support community, and now people are not feeling safe about you. And that was really hard to hear, because we're not trying to hurt anybody, you know. I think I got off topic, but so I knew going into this meeting that there was a lot of increased concern about our support group. So what I did, and I actually have them here, and I might share some later or not, but I have, I think at that point it was 13 pages, now it's 15 pages. I asked for people in our support community and in other support groups to share why these have been helpful and healing and safe places for them to kind of move forward and recover after learning the difficult information. And I truly, in my heart, I felt so confident that if I were to share this with our stake president, if I were to share this with our bishop, it's not Leah and Cody saying this is important, it's just their voices, that their testimonies, that their heartfelt stories that they shared would strike a chord and would compel them to understand the importance of these groups. And so I made copies of these. I also made copies of all of these in our disciplinary court and handed them to everyone. But I made a copy of this for our bishop and for our stake president. And I just pled, I said, please read these. Please, like if you, because he did say several times, what can I do? Which I really appreciated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He did say that. And I said, I was so glad. And I said, please read these. If you do anything, just please read their words. Don't take our word for it. Please read their words. And he did.
Leah, was that in the first or the second meeting where you shared those those narratives?
That was in the first meeting.
Okay. So you kind of knew what it was about before you went in.
Yeah, I believe our bishop had told us what it was about.
Okay.
We absolutely went in there knowing what it was about.
Okay. So Cody, anything you want to add about that first meeting?
No.
You know, to Mormons, we're so used to our leaders being able to do and ask us and say almost anything. They can ask us whether we're wearing the right underwear. They can ask a 12-year-old girl whether she touches herself, behind closed doors. They can ask married couples what they do or don't do in the bedroom if they want to. How much money we're giving to the church. Like, there's so much power that they have. So to a Mormon, these sorts of meetings with the bishop are just like routine. To a non-Mormon or someone who's never been Mormon, especially if they're in a Protestant or just a more progressive or liberal or even mainstream Christian religious tradition, this idea of being summoned to an interview where your information is being monitored and in some cases reported to your leaders, and then you're being sort of put through an inquisition where you're asked about your activities outside of church, and you're kind of being judged, evaluated for your ongoing worthiness and membership. How was that? I don't mean to make it sound all awful, but how was that for you guys? What's it like? And was it troublesome? Was it normal? Putting aside the good-heartedness and the good intentions of the leaders, I'm just talking about the act of being called in and sort of put through an inquisition.
Well, speaking for myself, I guess the answer is I was so Mormon that I didn't really think twice about it. We both were. We didn't say, we never had a discussion like, how dare he, or we don't have to answer this guy, we're not showing up. It was like, well, he's doing his job and we have nothing to hide. And sure, we're happy to talk about him, to talk about the support group and our efforts to support people and to find support. And hopefully we can educate him. I remember at the end of the meeting, one thing I would share is that, I told him that one of the most Christ-like and Christian things that he could do is to refer those who are struggling to our group, because the church either chooses not to or is unable to offer them the support and the community that they need. So the best thing he can do is to refer them to us. But anyway, to get back to your question, sorry, it was, I didn't really process it in that way, because I think there's part of me that just is still so Mormon.
Yeah, I would agree with what he said. And I just went in really hopeful in both meetings. And in the second meeting, for those who listen to the recordings, you'll hear me say, I think the four of us here today have the opportunity to make history in Columbus, Ohio. We can say, you are safe, and we are going to work together to create a healthier tomorrow for the church. And so I really didn't hesitate at all, ever, sharing with my bishop, sharing with my stake president. In fact, in many support groups, I have encouraged people to do the same thing, because the only way to stop being blamed for a history that we didn't write, or for, and many people have different experiences that are difficult. That was just our story. But the only way to stop being seen as the evil one, right, or being blamed, is to share our stories. And we're trying to do that in the most loving way that we can. So we share our story with our bishop. So we share our story with our stake president. And when we get called in, I actually am feeling each time excited, and I'm feeling hopeful, because they're giving us the opportunity to work with them to say, how can we work together? Or if you're not able or willing to work with us, we want to share with you what we're doing, because we feel like this needs to happen, and it's important work that we feel like we're doing, right? And that we were taught to do by our Mormon upbringing. And so I just went in there. I mean, we were always ready, willing to meet, excited to meet, tried to have constructive conversations that were respectful. They were respectful to us. We were respectful to them. And I just went in absolutely believing that it would never come to this. And I up until we got that letter, I didn't think that this would happen.
Okay, so why are you mentioning that it's important? Why is it important for you to mention that the Mormon Stories interview came after that first meeting? Why is that relevant?
Well, because they were upset about the support group, or I don't know if that's the right word, but they were concerned about the support group primarily. That was primarily what was discussed in both interviews. Certainly the first interview, that was the topic of discussion. And in the second interview as well, the podcast is brought up, but it is a very small part of the conversation. And, Cody finishes out that second interview by saying, well, what's the end game here?
Yeah, we could talk about that in a bit. I just want to make sure we're just making that point, because whether it's Kate Kelly or mine or others, there's this habit the church has of moving the needle. Why they call you in for a disciplinary council ends up becoming those reasons are different from what they put in the letter or what they say in a disciplinary council that they know is going to be recorded, or they know has a likelihood of being recorded. In other words, they kind of tell you a certain set of reasons in private and then change and offer alternative reasons when they know something's going to go public. And I feel like that can be unfair. So I'm just highlighting that now. Is there anything you guys want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that was our experience, John, is that, and again, the recordings of all this will be the truth test there as to how those accusations evolved. So.
Yeah.
So I think what happened from my, maybe this is my own conjecture, but my experience of it is the meetings were about, the first meeting was all about the support group. The second meeting was 95% about the support group, and we were asked to disband it or we would face disciplinary counsel. The podcast was mentioned, but it was never like, you did a podcast, so you're going to face disciplinary counsel. It was, we feel uncomfortable that you did this, but unless you disband the group, you're going to face disciplinary counsel. And we literally pleaded with them. We said, please don't do this. And you will hear that. Please don't do this. So it was a really interesting when we got into the disciplinary council to see that it was different.
Okay, so talk about anything you want to between the first meeting and the second with the stake president. Obviously, you decided to do a Mormon Stories podcast interview Do you want to talk about that or anything else, or
Yeah,
what do you?
It's
What's
really
that?
important for us to let everybody in our circle know why we did the Mormon Stories podcast interview. One thing that came out of that for us was a lot of misunderstanding as to why we did it, even with these leaders of the church. We did the interview because we had been helped, so much by hearing many interviews and hearing the stories of others who had gone before us along this faith journey. We were scared, we felt hopeless, and through hearing stories, we gained more and more peace and hope along the journey. And so at some point, in our conversations with you, and the idea of doing the podcast came up, the only question was, well, can we help others? And that was all that we ever discussed, is we can do this and it can help people, because there are thousands of people who have been, are, or will be in the situation that we've just been in for the last year. And gosh, if our story can help, and John you felt like our story could help, then it would be an act of love towards those people to share our story, to try and help. It was never for us about trying to profess our new beliefs to the world. It wasn't about trying to damage the church. It wasn't about making our believing family and friends uncomfortable or to feel less than in any way. But it was simply a desire to help, right? So that interview was actually 2 days after the first state meeting with our stake president, and the aftermath of the interview was really overwhelming. Just a lot of love, a lot of support, a lot of gratitude in the form of emails and messages and texts and comments on the web, on Facebook and so forth. It was just, Leah spent hours responding and still is responding and communicating with people and ministering to people. I've never, in our 16 plus years of marriage, 17 years of marriage, I've never seen Leah minister the way that she has ministered in the last couple of months. I mean, just really reaching out to people, showing up, listening, validating, being loving, not trying to persuade anybody in any one direction towards or away from the church, but just validating and listening. So Leah spent a lot of time in those days and weeks after the podcast engaged in that. It was sort of a consuming thing for her, but very, very good for her, I think, to be able to. I know she helped a lot of people, and I know that she felt strengthened by hearing the love and support from other people. So that was January 8th, and then January 27th was our second meeting with the stake president. And this meeting was with the stake president and the bishop. The first meeting was just with the stake president. The second meeting was with the stake president and the bishop.
And and just to go back to, we'll cover this when we talk about the criteria for apostasy. But so I remember coming out. I remember how beautiful your support group was. Such a positive interaction, just people sharing their truths. And I just have to say, the interview I did with you guys and with Brinley has been one of the most impactful and powerful interviews in the history of Mormon Stories. I can't travel now, doesn't matter what state, where when we talk about people's faith crisis, they bring up your interview by name. They bring up Cody and Leah and Brinley and just how much that interview meant to people. I think that's why you did it. I don't think you did it to criticize the church, to tell the brethren how to change the church. I don't think you were preaching any false doctrine. I think you were just simply being authentic and trying to help people. And I think you had a profound effect. So.
And that's why thank you, first of all, so much. Thank you so much. I remember right after the podcast, Cody's like, no one is going to want to listen to that. He was so worried, like who's going to want to listen to that? So we're glad that it was helpful. That was our heart. And that's also why we linked resources. Like I've had so many people that have thankfully found so much help through the linked, new wedding proposal of like, what are our commonalities? How can we come together? And so, or a letter that you could write to family, right? That was something else that we linked, or questions that we have, that we asked an apologist, things like this have really been helpful for people. So again, I just want to reiterate that those were shared to help people navigate a really difficult time with as many tools in their tool belt as we could offer to them, knowing the little that we did. Because, a minute ago you said, well, what's something like, well, what's normal or what's average or something, I can't remember through this, but it stood out to me because I thought, nothing is average. This is a brand new experience. This is uncharted territory, and we know it's uncharted for so many, and we just really have been taught to try and help people who are going through something difficult. And that's why we linked those things to the podcast as well as shared about them.
Absolutely. Okay, so what do you guys want to say about that second meeting?
So just before we get to the second meeting,
Oh yeah, sure.
Because I think this will be important. It does come up. You interviewed us. The following day, you interviewed Dan Vogel, which was an awesome interview.
Because he lives like 30 minutes from your house.
I know, we had no idea. And then that night, after you interviewed Dan, we had our support group came to our home, and you came and were gracious enough to make time to listen to them. And we did just like a little Q&A. You sat there and just people asked you questions and you answered, and people shared their stories and you listened and you validated. And it was really a lovely evening of fellowship and friendship and people who just wanted to have the chance to meet you. And so I felt like that was really a lot of fun. And I know that everybody in our group really appreciated that opportunity to be together and to have that Q&A and ask you some questions.
Yeah, that was a highlight.
That was fun. Thank you. It was really enjoyable. And it was a crazy day because I did 8 hours of interview with you. Then the next day, 8 hours of Dan Vogel. Then I'm racing back for that meeting.
Yeah, you were very, very gracious. Thank you for doing that.
Okay. So what about that second meeting do you want to say?
Well, my recollection, again, it was with the bishop and stake president. We spent the first while, it seemed like the stake president was questioning us about our beliefs, wanting us to basically share our testimony with him by way of asking us questions about our beliefs. I don't know what the intent behind that was. I felt like we had kind of shared a little bit of that already. I don't know if at that point he had in his mind the intention that this was headed towards church discipline and this was some sort of a procedural thing that had to be done. I don't know. But we spent a good while, as I remember, maybe 20 minutes or so, answering those questions about our testimony and what we believe. And that's when we got to that point, and then there was a clear transition from that. He had finished that line of questioning, and now he wanted to talk about the support group. Primarily, we did talk about the podcast, but my recollection, my feeling from that meeting was not like that. The podcast was the primary concern he had. It certainly didn't seem to be to me.
And what do you remember about his concerns about the support group, and talk about your generous offer again to have him and other leaders come actually visit one?
Yeah, so just a lot of questioning about what happens there. I forget which interview this was, even though I've heard both the last couple of days. But at one point, like, what are you counseling people? I mean, those kind of questions. Just a lot of concerns. And I remember at one point saying, or maybe it was you, or maybe it was both of us at different times, saying like, why are you so scared of our group? We don't understand why all the fear about our group, these groups exist in every city across the United States and in many countries outside of the United States. And so can you help us understand why you are so scared about the support that we're offering? I remember something else that came up, because we would ask what, at one point we mentioned, we're busy people. I mean, everybody's busy, right? We have 4 kids. Cody's very busy with work. I have a business. And, it's not like we're wondering what else can we do with our time. We're not like out there trying to make a problem. We saw a need and we stepped in and we said, trust us. If that need wasn't there, if the church offered something, or if our community here offered something, we would be the first ones to bow out. I mean, we would participate, but we wouldn't have started it, and that plead of like, help us, join us, come with us, sit with us. And after that second interview, well, at one point, Cody did say, what's the end goal here? He used those words. He says,
Was it end game or end goal?
End game.
Okay.
Yeah, end game, I think. What's the end game here?
Because we were sort of talking in circles. We were trying to reassure them, look, we're not preaching. This is not a religious organization. I think they had this idea that we were like the leaders of the group, which we don't view ourselves as in any way. We just started the Facebook page, and it's just a friendship group. We tried over and over to reassure them that, we have no desire to take anybody out of the church. We're, if somebody wants to go back to church, none of us are going to dissuade them from that. We'll be supportive and loving. They'll always be welcome. We have several who are in mixed faith marriages. We've tried to be explicit that we would hope that if at any point their believing spouse wants to come, that they would know that we would always welcome their believing spouse there. We would be always respectful and supportive of them in their relationship. We tried to. I think they had this idea, this boogeyman that they had created, this the stick man, if you will, and we were just trying to reassure them that wasn't the case, and it just seemed to be kind of going. We weren't understanding each other, and finally, I just said, okay, what's the end game? What are you getting at? And that's when they said, we want you to disband the group. And our response was unequivocal and immediate that no, we're not going to disband the group. It would go against everything that we stand for. We have a community of friends that love and support each other in ways that are unique and helpful. And we've given you 13 pages of testimonials that help you to understand that. The stake president did mention that he had read all 13 pages, that it was impactful for him, that he was touched by it. So we were grateful for that, but we reassured them that we're not going to disband the group. And so then they countered and they said, well, then we're going to have to consider church discipline. And so I said, well, that doesn't sound like much of a request. It sounds more like an ultimatum. And they said, no, it's a request. I said, well, we answered your request and you're not accepting our request. You're demanding that we offer a different answer. And if not, then there is a consequence, and that constitutes an ultimatum.
And at one point, Cody did say, it kind of feels like censorship to me. And they said, no, we're just asking. We're just giving you a choice. And he says, but if my answer is no, and then I'm going to face church disciplinary, I mean, it's not really, it's sort of this idea is like you can ask the approved questions and use the approved materials and come up with the approved answers. That's not really freedom, So if you're going to face something really terrible and shameful, if you don't give the right answer, then that doesn't really seem like you're giving us a choice.
Right. Also, I think it's notable that they're not calling in other members who are part of the group. So why are they singling you out? Again, you mentioned that they thought you were the leaders, but does that matter? The definition of apostasy is about joining groups, not leading groups. So there's this, we'll be talking about at the end, this weird selectivity that happens where they'll give these criteria, whether it's coming on a podcast or starting a support group or talking publicly about your disbeliefs or whatever the criteria are. And I could go through and name dozens of people that fit any or all of the criteria, and they've been completely left alone. And it's important to note that it's an ultimatum. They didn't say, take your podcast down, for Mormon Stories. They didn't say, never meet with John DeLynn again. They didn't say, stop sharing what you think or feel on the internet. All they said was disband the support group, right?
Correct. And I don't remember the exact timing of it. It did not happen in the meeting, but I believe after this second meeting is when we sent out the invitation by email to our
4 stakes.
To our stake, specifically in this case, to our stake president and to our bishop, to come to one of our support group meetings where we would not debate issues. The only goal of that meeting would be for us to come together and to try and better understand each other and talk about how we can better support each other and build bridges.
And I just want to give a shout out to the gentleman in our group, not by name, but who put that together. Our group was beginning to feel, we let them know, because when we asked for the comments from them, they knew that that we were going to be meeting about this group. And so we're all trying to put our heads together of how can we help the leadership? How can we build bridges? How can we help them feel safe? What's our, now we're threatened with the disciplinary council. And so we're just like, what can we do? And so our group together, we came up with this idea of let's invite them. How can we better help them see that this is about pastoral care, love, kindness, acceptance, validation in a non-threatening way? We sent an invitation. We thanked them for we said, you're good men. We thank you for your service. A gentleman in our group put together a beautifully written invitation. We sent that to our bishop. We never heard anything. There was 0 response via text. And then Cody sent it to the stake president.
Yeah, and by email, he replied that he didn't feel like that was the best way, but that he would be happy to meet with any member of our stake privately in his office.
And I just thought, number one, that was such a classy, out of the box move for you guys to just invite them. Because we sometimes have such a warlike bunker mentality that, we just kind of like pick up our weapons or our shields. And you guys are like, no, come to these meetings, see that they're, active, believing and non-believing, inactive post-Mormons, come see. And then it's just so distressing. Christ would come to that meeting. He would come to those meetings if he lived or existed. He would accept that invitation. He would say, okay, let's see for ourselves. Let's get to know these people and reach out to them and connect with them and share with them and support them. So the fact that they didn't even, attend, let alone even give you a response, that's really disappointing. And it shows a high level of immaturity or fear, even though, again, I know you are insistent that these are good men, and I'm sure they are, because they always are,
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to be summoned to a disciplinary council for creating a support group when we've invited the 4 stakes worth of leaders. There was one gentleman in the group whose bishop and stake president did say that they would come, but because there was no one else who came, we really felt, again, it was like, oh, we're gonna do this and we're gonna build this bridge and we're gonna create history, you know what I mean? And every step along the way, I am just like, we are doing this and this is gonna be awesome. And so each meeting, and then the invitation, and then no one's really willing to come, and then this response that the place for people to feel safe is in an interview in an office. It feels really deflating at times in our shoes, and I think for our group, to just feel like, what more can we do? What more can we do?
Yeah.
And then to be called in from what we knew because of the podcast, and yet, or because, sorry, not because of the podcast, from what we knew because of the support group, when we've offered you a chance to be with us, with many people who've sat in your office begging you for a safe place, and to have that invitation turned down that was hard.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about that second meeting with the stake president and the bishop?
I don't think so.
Okay. Anything you want to say about the time? How much time was it, if you remember, between that second meeting and receiving the letter?
Yeah, so January 27th until April 2nd.
Yeah, so like what's going on in those months, right?
So I can share with you that we were, after the second meeting, we were worried, right? It was, I mean, we basically had said we're not disbanding the support group, so we knew that at minimum the stake president was considering church disciplinary council. So so we were worried initially, but then after 2 months of hearing nothing, and it's not like we're pestering him like, hey, what are you going to decide? What are you going to do? We're just like, finally, after 2 months or so, we were thinking to ourselves, fantastic. They've decided just to drop it. Hopefully we don't have to go and meet again. I hope that they're just trusting that we're just trying to be loving and supportive of others who are in need, and find love and support for ourselves as well. And so that's kind of the state that we were in. We had, I don't want to say we had forgotten about it, but we felt relieved that nothing had happened.
I kind of thought y'all had dodged a bullet, and I was hopeful. You know, I was like, oh, maybe they're going to leave him alone, you know? Yeah.
That would have been our greatest, aside from joining with us and helping or showing up, our second greatest wish would have been just let us please just
Leave you alone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so anything else happened between the second meeting and the letter that's worth mentioning, other than tens of thousands of people listening to your podcast and you guys making private phone calls of support and emails and texts to dozens and dozens of people who felt like they needed to reach out to you to get support because they were drowning and struggling and suffering too? Anything else happened during those months?
Well, so the week that the letter, we were notified of the disciplinary council by letter on a Tuesday. The Monday, the day before that, the bishop was actually in our home. He sent us a text over the weekend saying, hey, I'd really like to meet. We were just coming back from spring break. And so we said, sure, you can come over Monday night. He made it clear. I said, well, why do we need to meet? Or he had made it clear that the reason was our two oldest girls were planning to go to girls' camp with the church. And they both have friends in the ward and in the stake, and both have loved girls' camp in the past and wanted to have that opportunity. And for us, that was just fine. We have no problem with that. We have an open dialogue with our kids, and we're not concerned in the least about them going to girls' camp. In fact, we're grateful that they would have that opportunity to rub shoulders with all the good people in the ward and in the stake that we love, both youth and leaders. But the bishop wanted to come by, and he came by and basically just wanted to make sure. He told us that the stake had sent him, and I'm sure what had happened is that they were concerned that our daughters wanted to go, and they wanted to be reassured that our girls would
not say anything to hurt anyone else's
play nicely, I guess, you know what I mean. Which we reassured him, and he needed no reassurance. He said, I know that this is not going to be a problem. We want to make sure that your girls are willing to be there, and we also want to make sure that your girls are willing to participate in any of the, there is going to be spiritual activities, and we want them to feel comfortable. We want them to feel safe, I guess. We want them to feel comfortable. And so we reassured him, yep, we're fine with all of that. The girls can go. This is their choice. We'll be supportive.
And we reassured him as well that, a family pact that we made early on was that it is not our position to share any of what we've learned, especially for our children. That was really important to us, that you need to stay safe for these friends that you have. And it is not your position to share any of these things that we're sharing with you about the history that we've learned about with your believing family and friends, because that will make them not feel safe with you. Now, I think that in some cases has happened, whether they've said anything or not, but we reassured our bishop that was something that was really important, again, really important to our family. And we felt he was gracious and kind, and had said that he was sent to meet with us. I don't
think he would have come on his own accord, because he knew us well enough to know that, and he knows our girls well enough to know that there would be no problem.
Absolutely. Okay. So like your bishop is, just met with you, you're feeling good again. The next day the letter comes. What was it like to receive that letter?
I was actually sitting in the garage. So part of my daily experience is trying to help people in a difficult time for them. And that day was no different. And I was Marco Poloing with someone who'd been through and was navigating this difficult time, and just offering love and validation and reassurance. And on my phone, I could see, because we have the Nest doorbell, so I could see, I'm like, oh my gosh, 2 men are at my door and my kids are in there alone. So I stopped right away and I ran to the front door. I was in the car because it was the only quiet place for a moment for me, because Cody was working. And 2 of our friends from the ward had a letter, and I knew what it was right away. And because they were dressed in their, church attire, and they were friendly, and they just said, we have a letter from the stake president, I think is what they said. And, I'm holding the dogs, juggling the dogs, and got the kids in the back. And I said, well, okay, thank you. And I just couldn't believe it. Because, we sent our bishop off, our friend, we sent him off with muffins. And I felt, after he left, I just thought, I'm so thankful that we are moving past the fear of being labeled or judged for creating a support group. I felt that night. I just felt so happy and thankful for that after he left.
Right. Cody, do you want to add anything? How you felt when you received the letter?
So I wasn't at home. So Leah texted me a message of the letter without any warning, without any. So I was sitting in my car, and when I got when I saw the letter and I read the letter, and when I realized what was happening, it was an immediate visceral response. My hands started shaking, my heart started beating really fast, and I couldn't believe it, right? I really couldn't believe it. I know that some might say, well, you should have known this was coming, and on one hand that may be true, but after 2 months, I guess we had accepted and rejoiced in the fact that this was not going to happen. And so it seemed so surreal after having, yes, we had disassociated ourselves from the church and activity in the church. No, we had no hard feelings for the church, had no desire to hurt the church, but we just wanted to coexist. And the reality is that for 40 years of my life, I was completely dedicated to the church, and we had given all that we could, all that we knew how to give, all that we had been taught to give to the church. And it felt like a really bad sucker punch after all that we had dedicated to the church, to be treated in this way, even to be summoned, not even knowing how it was going to turn out, but just even to be summoned was really, really hard. That night, I wrote my first ever Facebook post about our faith transition. And I tried to keep it short. I tried to keep it pretty vanilla. I posted a picture of the letter. I let people know that we were being summoned to disciplinary council. And I think in the last paragraph, I was a little raw, a little real about my feelings about having received the letter and being summoned, that it didn't feel loving, that it felt more like I was part of it. It felt like the church was behaving as a totalitarian regime more so than a Christian church. And I stated that, and Leah and I had talked about it. What should we do? And we had decided, the conclusion has probably already been determined, and so we should just resign and not give them the power to get us in a room and try and dictate to us our eternal fate as they might see it. And as well, and it was very important for us, was as well to try and protect our children. There's something very different within any LDS community between being an inactive member of the church and being a resigned member of the church, and in being an excommunicated apostate of the church. Only one of those is named in the Temple Recommend Questions, right? And that's the apostate. Do you affiliate or agree with any, essentially any apostate person or organization? So there is absolutely a stigma within this church of being an apostate. And we didn't want that for our girls. As we've said, some of our girls still had a desire to go to girls' camp. And so we didn't want to put up any further barriers between us and our Mormon friends here locally, our Mormon family. We just didn't want to make it any more difficult on anybody. And we felt like being called an apostate, being officially labeled an apostate, would do more harm to those relationships than simply quietly taking our names, or less publicly taking our names off the rolls of the church. And so that's what I indicated in that post that night, which was, again, my very first Facebook post about faith.
Right.
Ever.
Right. Okay. And what ended up making you change your mind?
Core values.
Yeah, I think it went back to us standing up for what we believe in, right? We had been taught all of our Mormon upbringing to stand up for what you believe in. It's part of what made me feel special in high school, being in this small minority of LDS students, was that I had the opportunity to stand up. I could tell people I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs. This is who I am. This is how I want to live. And I'm going to stand up for that because it feels right. And nothing about what we were doing, John, felt wrong to us. It all felt very right. It all felt like it was in line with everything we had been taught growing up and in the church. And so it felt, the more we talked, the more we really began to feel, and talking with our kids also encouraged us, right? They said they actually wanted us to defend ourselves, to stick up for ourselves. And so it was really a family decision. We talked about it a lot, but in the end, that's why we decided, no, we're not going to go quietly. We're going to stand up for what we believe in. We're going to stand up for the good things that we're trying to do. And we felt very wrongly accused. And
Leah, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, finish. I'm done. That was good. You want to roll?
Well, so we felt wrongly accused, and we felt like, again, no intention to harm the church, but gosh, we're making it really easy for the church to do something that we feel like is not just and not kind and not Christ-like. So at a minimum, we're going to stand up for ourselves, and we're going to try, and we're going to fight it to the best we can, and hope and just try and get it overturned, or to get the verdict we would like. And so that's what we decided.
And in addition to that, another big part of that decision was, we have come to really develop friendships with so many people in these communities. And, part of us feels so bad that people, we've had to increase security. All these Facebook groups are heavily vetted. You have to ask questions. We go and look at that person's Facebook page because of the strengthening of the members committee that the church has, that does have moles that get into these Facebook groups. And just 2 weeks ago, someone was brought by their local leadership an entire file of any comment that he had written in a private support group as means for excommunication. And so as this is going on, we're feeling increasingly responsible and sad that the people in our group are feeling potentially less safe and more targeted. And because we know that this fear exists throughout all the support groups, or else why would they be private and why would they be heavily vetted? I mean, I hope for a day when they don't have to be, right? When people don't have to be scared that they'll be found out that they're in a group because they're questioning their faith. That's my hope. But right now, that's not the case. And who's going to stand up, And I would say it's 1 out of 100 people I talk to who's even said anything about their questioning, about their concerns. They are so scared. They're so scared. And so I hope that our title of apostate means going forward that, I hoped to be exonerated. And I hoped to come on this and to say, come out from the shadows. You're safe. And I even told you that, John. We told you that. We don't want to hurt the church. We want to build bridges. So our greatest hope was to come on this podcast and say, guys, they made the right decision. You're safe. You're safe to share your truth. You were taught to be honest. You're safe to seek community when you've lost it. That's what we wanted to do. That's what we begged for them to help us do, was to send that message. We pleaded with them in those meetings. But that wasn't the outcome. And so I take a lot of hope in being the example of something that doesn't work, that doesn't build bridges. And I hope that no one else has to be in this position. I hope that church leadership, that Salt Lake City will see this, will hear this, I hope that maybe some people will feel more brave to step forward as the admins of groups or as participating in groups and to speak out. Because if there's hundreds of thousands of people participating in these groups, they're not going to excommunicate all of us, right? But we have to add our voices, because there's nothing shameful in what we've done. We've been honest, we've been kind, we've tried the best we can with the tools that we have, and we hope, and this was why we decided to go, is we hoped to be exonerated. We hoped to say, it's safe, come out of the shadows. That's not what happened. And so now we hope that church leaders will think about the impact that this is making to excommunicate someone who's trying to build bridges, and that they won't do this in the future.
Right. Yeah. And I personally always try and take a really careful approach to these sorts of situations. Leah, when you reached out to me a year and a half ago, I was probably hesitant to respond, but certainly once I did respond and I started trying to help you and your family, there was no desire on my part or any indication that things would ever end up like this. I just didn't think that was possible. Frankly, I never thought that the church would ever dare excommunicate a family as lovely as yours. I just didn't think that was even possible. But, we worked together some, talked a lot, became close friends. And, and so I didn't ask you to start the support group. You did that on your own. You did it because you wanted to get and give support. And even when I did the interview, I wasn't, so many people have done Mormon Stories Podcast and have never been excommunicated, like the overwhelming majority. It's not like any of this could have been foreseen. And again, like you said, hundreds of Facebook communities have been started and thousands and tens of thousands have joined these groups, and no one's ever been excommunicated for them that I'm aware of. So none of this could have been predicted. But when I realized that you guys were facing a disciplinary council and you said to me, we may just resign, of course, part of me is like, yeah, absolutely, do whatever you want. Whatever's best for your family. I don't want to intervene. I wouldn't wish, having been through excommunication, me and my wife and kids, and how traumatizing it was and still remains for my children and for me and my wife in so many ways, and the stigma and the pain and the difficulty and the strained family relationships. I would never wish this on anyone. So when you said at first you guys were going to just resign, I was like, yeah, that makes total sense, and I support it. And there's another part of me, if I'm just being honest, that says the problem with that is that when we just quietly walk away and resign, that especially when the church is threatening us and delivering us ultimatums for really unjust things, the problem with that is that the church can, for you, for your family, for friends, for ward members, stake members, it's like, what happened to Leah and Cody? Oh, well, they resigned. And that's not what happened. That would have been a gross mischaracterization of what led to these things, And so I'm always torn, never wanting anyone to go through this and not wanting the church to get away with this type of surveillance, inquisition, threats, ultimatums, and ultimately this kangaroo court of a really unjust disciplinary council. And so, again, when you told me you wanted to do the interview after all, or wanted to go through the disciplinary council and you were going to face the verdict, on the one hand, I was sad. I was sick in my stomach. Oh my gosh, now the Youngs are going to go through what my family went through. I don't want that for Brinley. I don't want that for, any of your other kids. I just want them to be happy and healthy. That's the main thing I felt. But I also thought and felt a little bit, well, the one thing I'm glad about is that there will be a public record of what the church is doing to people that will last forever as a witness, to quote Tanner Gilliland's recent video, which is powerful. There will be a witness to the way the church treats people in 2010, 2012, 2014, 2015, 2019. Because they've been doing this to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of families. And not everyone has the privilege or the strength or the resources to be able to stand up to the church. And so while I was sad for you and your family, I was proud of you and grateful that you guys felt like you had the desire and the courage and the resources and the privilege to be able to stand up to the church to create a witness for their unchristlike and unfair and outrageous acts of of all those things I mentioned. So that's just my little editorial on that.
Thanks, John.
And I guess I just want to say, yeah, I was the person who reached out to you because I'd been, tied to Mormon Stories, basically every waking hour for months, and hearing everyone's stories have been so helpful for me. And I just think it's really important to say thank you to the people who go out on a limb, especially in the face of criticism, and do things to help others. So I sent you a Facebook message and I was just like, thank you so much. Do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
And you were just like, I think you maybe thought I was a mole or something in the beginning. You're like, who are you? It was really short, but then we're so thankful, John, that you went back to get a PhD to help us, to help our family, to help families like us, to do what you do. You were a huge part of helping our marriage during the most difficult time that we have ever walked through in our marriage. And I just remember you saying to me, help him feel safe. You can split faith is okay. Help him feel safe in the church. There's so many good things about the church. Don't try and give him the information. Help him feel safe. Help him feel safe. And I also remember something that stood out to me in the retreat that we went to. And many people probably who don't actually know you or haven't spent time with you might not know this, but you speak so favorably about the church that it really, you know, in very supportive, kind ways, in ways that make people who are there who are fully believing members feel safe. And something that's been really sad to me through this is seeing people like you and now like us very unfairly characterized. And there are people who blocked me on social media simply because I've interacted with you. These are people who don't know you, but they know that you've been labeled as an apostate. And now we've been labeled as an apostate. And so I'm sure that we'll experience some, I mean, we're not doing all the good work that you're doing, but we'll experience some of that people can't answer the temple recommend question. Potentially they feel that they cannot be our friend. And we've already experienced that because now we're labeled as apostates. And I just think the best things that in my life have come through zooming in and trying to understand and love. Every single time I do that, I grow additional compassion and empathy for that person. And that's exactly what got us to this place. And it's difficult sometimes to feel like you think you're going to go through, you know, you go through something really, really difficult, and you think that the people around you who really love you and who trust you and who know you're a person of character and integrity and you're well thought out. And I hope that we're trying to live in that way. And something that's been sort of alarming to Cody and I is that nobody asks. Nobody asks. They'll unfriend you, or they may block you, or they may judge you, or they may send you mean messages, or they may say, I can't believe you're hurting me, or you're doing this to me, which, gosh, we're not trying to hurt anybody, but nobody asks. And that seemed, and I'm not trying to blow sunshine up my skirt at all here, but that seemed so natural to me when Nicole was hurting and struggling with the church to ask why. And yet I can name like with 3 fingers, you know, and we know a lot of people. We've lived in a lot of different places. Nobody asks why.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the most mind-boggling things. I am going to read the criteria for apostasy from the Church Handbook of Instructions before people listen to the interview, because I just want to make sure they think about whether this criteria has been met. So think about the story that Cody and Leah have shared so far. Think about the 2 meetings with the stake president. Realize that by the time they'd received the letter, Cody had posted nothing on his Facebook account ever, other than his Mormon Stories interview, where he's just sharing his story. He'd never. What's that?
He would not allow you to tag him in that. That was never on his wall. Never.
Yeah, exactly. So other than doing an interview with Mormon Stories just to share the story, just to share your truth, you know, you guys had been almost relatively silent in any public space. Leah, you had posted a little bit. But, you know, I just want to make sure and explain that before I read the criteria for apostasy. So here's the criteria. Repeatedly, that's the first word, so multiple times, act in clear, open, and deliberate public opposition to the church or its leaders. So is it public opposition to the church or its leaders to do a Mormon Stories podcast? If so, hundreds and hundreds of people would be excommunicated, but they haven't. And again, repeatedly act in clear, open, and deliberate public opposition. A private Facebook group, is that public opposition? I don't think so. And then it says persist in teaching as church doctrine information that is not church doctrine after they have been corrected by their bishop or a higher authority. I don't think you guys have ever said, this is what we think church doctrine is. The church has church doctrine wrong. Here's what we think church doctrine is. You guys do not opine about what is or should be church doctrine, correct?
Correct.
I think you have no interest in trying to explore or expound upon what is church doctrine. And then it says, continue to follow the teachings of apostate sects, such as those that advocate plural marriage after being corrected by their bishop or a higher authority. Do you guys follow teachings of apostate sects like FLDS Church or Denver Snuffer? Do you follow any of that stuff?
Not in the least.
No, and you've never talked about it. And of course, before the change, it was are in a same, this is still currently in the handbook, are in a same gender marriage. Are you in a same gender marriage? And then formally join another church and advocate its teachings, which you haven't done.
No.
So I just want people to think about the story they've heard and ask themselves if this criteria has been met. And then we're going to go ahead and play the auto recording now of the disciplinary council. It's 2 hours long. And I want you to ask yourself, did the stake president make the case that the criteria for apostasy, the church's own criteria, has been met? Is there anything you guys want to say before we jump to the recording?
Well, I think it's important, John, that I give a bit of a disclaimer in terms of what people are going to hear as far as my testimony goes.
Okay.
We brought 2 witnesses. Okay. The first witness was our daughter Brinley, because she begged and pleaded to be a witness on our behalf. We did not ask her to. I really didn't want her to, but she begged and pleaded, and the stake president approved it. So she was allowed to be a witness, which now, in hindsight, I'm very grateful that she was.
She wrote a handwritten letter to the stake president herself and had Cody hand deliver it because she was so passionate about speaking in our defense.
Yeah. And then we have another gentleman who came. His name's Adam. He's part of our local support group community. He was our second witness. And then after Adam speaks, it'll be my testimony. I felt like it was really important as part of my testimony to help the 15 men in that room understand how it is we went from being all in, completely dedicated to the church, to appearing, at least in their eyes, to be apostates, which I believe is totally unfounded. But how did I go from that point to this point? How did we get to the point that we're now appearing in a disciplinary council? I felt like it was really important to help them understand what our journey looked like and what it felt like. And a very important part of that for us was this discovery process, was understanding the church through our discovery, through our research of the church doctrine, the church history. Most of what I share with them is founded or based on essays that the church itself has produced on its website and research that I did in trying to understand those essays better that led me to certain discoveries, like about Joseph Smith and the multiple First Vision accounts. So I just want to give a little bit of a disclaimer for those who may be listening to the podcast who maybe don't want to hear me talk about those discoveries that we made in terms of doctrinal and historical issues in the church. I don't apologize for it in the least. I don't regret at all that I shared it. I think it's very important to our story and to helping those men understand. I just want to be sensitive that there may be listeners to your podcast who are not ready to or don't have the desire to listen to that part. It's only in my testimony that that's shared.
Additionally, you'll notice that we were both trying to talk pretty quickly because we were given 60 minutes, and that included our witnesses. So by the time it got to me, I'm talking pretty quickly. So I apologize for that. And then they were going to cut me off, but I'm so thankful that they let me finish. And so I talked even faster. And with my braces, sometimes that's a little bit difficult. So that's why I'm talking so rapidly.
And it's just so clear he was uncomfortable with the truth you were speaking, because several times he's like, time to be done, time to be done. And people will get a sense for that. And of course, there were dozens of us outside of the disciplinary council cheering you guys on and celebrating you. Kudos and a shout out to everyone who attended. You can go to the Mormon Stories Podcast Facebook page to hear what people were saying out in the parking lot and to get images of everything that was going on. And I just want to say, what's that?
Go ahead.
And I just want to say it's a testament to how classy you guys are. One, Cody, that you'd want to give that disclaimer just to protect the virgin, innocent ears of those who don't want to hear about the problems of the church. And two, it's so classy that you guys insisted that we redact the names of the people involved. You didn't have to do that. It took a lot of time and effort. Shout out to Cody Layton for his help and to you guys. But I think that's so classy. And I just want to say, Brinley's testimony is amazing. Just phenomenal. The other gentleman, tell me his name again. Adam is phenomenal. What a witness as an active member. He speaks to his experience in these support groups, which is phenomenal. And then Cody, your summary of the church's problems with this truth claims is brilliant. It should be published somewhere and shared, even though you may not want that. And Leah, your heartfelt, thoughtful, passionate plea at the end, along with the Q&A, is just so amazing. So anything you guys want to say before we start the audio?
Thank you. Well, one last thing I want to say is that, we've been criticized for making this a spectacle. So I just want to respond to that and just say, first of all, we begged and pleaded for this not to happen. Second of all, we didn't beg people to come. Nobody. They asked to come. They wanted to come. They asked for details so that they could come. And I think that when you've gone through something like this as a support community, it wouldn't be reasonable for us to tell them not to come. And I also want to just say that we were not trying to publicize ourselves by having you come, even though we're so thankful you came, John. We want to say just a public shout out, because we didn't plan on having you come. We had that conversation. We said, please, we're good. Don't worry about it. And we are so thankful that a generous donor who's been so touched by Mormon Stories, who's flown you out to other disciplinary courts, was willing to step up. And it was so meaningful to him to have you come. And we're so grateful that you did. But he stepped up. He paid for your flight. And I don't know if he's comfortable with his name being said or not. So I'm not going to be the one to say it.
Yeah, shout out to Matt. Huge thanks to Matt for flying me out to attend the disciplinary council. Not that I needed another trip, super busy, not that we want to make a spectacle, but having been through an excommunication, I just wanted you guys to feel loved and supported. And I wanted to help make sure that, this record was created for his history, so.
We were glad you were there, but it wasn't in an attempt, again, to hurt people. That wasn't our goal. It's never been our goal.
Yep, or to convert, or to deconvert, or even to shame anyone, or try and tell the church to change. It's just, you guys deserve support.
We want the church to change. We want the church to be healthier, but it wasn't to hurt. It was just to help.
Absolutely. All right. Without any further ado, I'm going to start the audio recording. It's about 2 hours long. So thanks to everyone who's willing to listen. It really is worth listening. It's one of the best audio recordings ever made in the modern Mormon era of a disciplinary council. And so we got really good audio quality, and I'm really happy about that. And then the content is just phenomenal as well. So it's really worth listening to. We want to encourage you guys who are joining us through Facebook Live to make comments. We would love, we're going to be watching your comments. We'll be responding to your comments. So if you have positive or negative responses, comments, questions, post them to the Facebook Live feed, and we'll be responding during the recording. And then, of course, we'll come back afterwards to do a final, discussion of everyone's reaction. And we'll answer any other questions and give you guys a chance to give some final thoughts. Does that sound all right?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.